care about the Jewish state of Israel. And I want to introduce our first speaker, Ann Bayevsky. Ann is best able to really to convey the important purpose of today's press conference better than I can. She's an international lawyer, the director of the Toro Institute on Human Rights and the Holocaust, and the president of Human Rights Voices. She's an author, an editor, a regular media contributor, and she's a leading expert on global anti-Semitism and the demonization of Israel at the United Nations. She's won multiple awards for her courageous contributions to combating anti-Semitism and promoting human rights. She's a member of the International Law Association Committee on Human Rights Law and Practice and has taught at York University, University of Ottawa Law Faculty, and Columbia University Law School. She's served, wow, she's got a serious resume, doesn't she? She has served as a delegate of the many organizations and UN conferences worldwide. She's educated at the University of Toronto and Oxford University and is a barrister and solicitor of the Ontario Bar. And we are very grateful that she is here. So with that, Ann Bayevsky.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Can you hear me if I just leave it here? You push the button. American bipartisan foreign policy begins with the premise that peace between Israelis and Arabs, including Palestinian Arabs, must come through direct negotiations and not through imposition of terms and conditions by third parties for a reason. Direct negotiations require each side to recognize and legitimize the other. This week marks the 69th anniversary of the adoption of the General Assembly in 1947 of the Partition Resolution, setting out a Jewish and an Arab state. The Jews said yes, the Arabs said no, and for 69 years, almost every Arab state and the Palestinian population have looked for every possible way to turn back the clock to November the 28th, 1947, through successive wars and years of terrorism that began decades before 1967. What they have been unable to accomplish on the battleground, they have sought to accomplish via the political battlefield of the United Nations. One Jewish state versus 21 Arab states among 56 Islamic states, which are in turn the largest single voting bloc within the 119 states of the so-called non-aligned movement. These countries, which are largely non-democracies and whose dominant spokespersons at the UN have been Iran and Cuba, constitute almost 2/3 of the UN membership. By virtue of their numbers, they wield power at the General Assembly against the one and only Jewish state that can really only be described as an international mob, incessantly attempting to accomplish through deadly politics what Israel's enemies have been unable to do through war. Yesterday, the UN held International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on the anniversary of the Partition Day resolution by flying only one flag of what the General Assembly calls the State of Palestine. Partition Day, and there was no flag of the Jewish state, the UN member state of Israel. It wasn't held in a back room. Beside the display of only a Palestinian flag sat the President of the Security Council and the President of the General Assembly. Today, the General Assembly, as we speak, the General Assembly is scheduled to adopt another 6 resolutions condemning Israel, bringing this year's total to 19 against Israel and 7 critical of human rights records in all of the other 192 UN member states combined. To further understand this mob mentality, consider this statistic. The General Assembly has never held an emergency special session in 20 years on any subject but Israel. They never held one on genocide and crimes against humanity in Rwanda, in Sudan, in the former Yugoslavia. And there are 400,000 plus dead in Syria. No emergency general special session. But in the past 20 years, the General Assembly has held 16 such sessions or resumed sessions on Israel alone. The UN's top women's rights body annually adopts only one resolution critical of only one state for violating the rights of women anywhere in the world, Israel, for allegedly violating the rights of Palestinian women. Not Palestinian men, not second-class citizenship in Saudi Arabia, not stoning in Iran, just Israel. A constant drumbeat to delegitimize and destroy the one and only Jewish state. The only thing standing in the way of this mob is the veto of the United States at the UN Security Council. The veto power is not a tool which the United States uses lightly, but it exists because it is absolutely essential to protect the values of our country, our Constitution, and our firm understanding of right and wrong from an undemocratic mob. Protecting the Jewish state, Jewish self-determination, from 7 decades of rejection and discrimination and double standards and demonization is part of our core sense of what human dignity is all about. So in this context, any failure by the Obama administration to veto a Security Council resolution on Israel is wrong on many levels. I'll just be very quick and outline them. Number one, handing Palestinians a victory in the absence of direct negotiations pushes negotiations off, perhaps forever. Why negotiate when the politics of the mob succeeds? Two, it would be permanent. A Russian and Chinese veto would prevent any effort to rescind it in the future by President Trump or any other president. Such a drastic change to bipartisan American foreign policy fundamentals in the waning weeks of the presidency is profoundly undemocratic. Four, whatever the actual substance of the possible resolution, which is still unknown, a parameters resolution setting out the terms of the end result of non-existent negotiations, or declaring settlements, the allegedly offensive presence of Jews on Arab-claimed land, to be illegal, is a win for belligerents and sustained rejection of a Jewish state. And last but not least, a possible resolution declaring settlements on Arab-claimed territory to be illegal, rather than an issue specifically set out in multiple agreements and resolutions as subject to negotiations, would be A, an endorsement of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions enterprise, B, open the floodgates of legal and political intimidation and blackmail of American corporations, and C, a major incentive to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to push forward with slanderous claims that Israel leaders are guilty of war crimes. In short, the failure to veto a Security Council move on Israel in the few remaining days of the Obama administration would be anti-democratic, anti-peace, anti-economic freedom, anti-Israel, and an insult to the integrity of the political system of all Americans.
You're here.
I want to thank Ann Bajewski for those very revealing remarks on what's happening at the UN these days and how the Obama administration must not take any unilateral action in these last days of its term. I'm going to make a few remarks, then hand the floor over to Trent Franks, and then I'm going to open the door, and I'd love for the opportunity for some other members who are here to weigh in as well. I want to thank Melody Devine for organizing this from my staff. As Ann has said, it's long-held U.S. policy that the future of U.S. and Palestine be conducted by direct and bilateral negotiations for all the reasons that she mentioned. Anything apart from that won't have any promise of future success. So it has to be done that way. The United Nations, unfortunately, is not the forum or the arbiter for there to be a just relationship between between Israel and Palestinian people. We have seen this, as Ann started to describe. I'll give you a little bit more background on the pathetic record that the UN has when it comes to condemning human rights, what it calls human rights abuses. In the 68th session 2 years ago, 21 of 25 resolutions condemning any human rights violations in the entire world were against Israel. 21 out of 25. In this last session, the 69th, 20 of 23 total resolutions condemning human rights abuses were against Israel. And remember, there are 193 countries out there, other territories as well, and then there are people like Cuba, Iran, that never even get a mention many times. We've seen the recent very poorly advised action by UNESCO to not carry out its mandate, but to deny Jewish historical, archaeological, spiritual, and cultural ties to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, and by inference, Christian ties as well. That is, in the word UNESCO, there is the word educational. You'd think that they would be out to promulgate truth and reason, but an action like that violates its very mission. So we can't have and should not have end runs around bilateral negotiations by going to the UN on the part of the Palestinian Authority. It is actually counterproductive and harmful. It gives false hope to the Palestinian people that should not be there, and it enables the leadership to say, well, we did something there. We don't have to deal across the table with any leadership in Israel. And that doesn't have any promise or future of success. So if Barack Obama and his administration do not veto a condemnatory Israel-related resolution at the UN in these waning days of its administration, it would be in effect changing long-held U.S. policy. U.S. policy, as Ann has stated, is for the U.S. to urge Israel and the Palestinian people to meet across the negotiating table and to hammer this out in a bilateral fashion. So let me just conclude by saying that President Obama in his last days of office must not make a unilateral and harmful change in U.S.-Israel policy. He must direct his UN ambassador to veto any resolution that condemns Israel and tilts the playing field away from Israel. At this point, I would like my good friend and colleague, Trent Franks of Arizona, who is a stalwart, who is a 100%er when it comes to supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship, to make a few remarks.
Thank you. And it's always wonderful to follow one of the true stalwarts in this Congress related to Israel, Doug Lamborn. And I also thank you, Melody, and thank you, Andy Braun from my staff, and Jessica Cahill. I think the only reason any of us would be here is because we care about Israel and we understand the profound significance that Israel plays, not only in the world, but certainly in the best interest of the United States. And so without trying to repeat a lot of things, let me just essentially say that probably one of the things that motivates me most to be here is when I looked at UNESCO's vote recently, in October of last year, or this year, I'm sorry, that they recognized the Temple Mount, and they said that it was holy to Muslims only. And the absurdity of that, of course, stands on its own. But the United Nations is nothing if not a platform for the world's anti-Semites to espouse their vile hatred of the Jewish people across the world. And as such, it's been the policy of our administration to veto the kinds of things that they catalyze in the UN. And my hope, obviously, is that that continues in this lame duck. And this president's record in the last 8 years is certainly a valid reason for us to be here, because he has not supported Israel as he claims to do. And so it's important that he understands that the Congress will respond with whatever constitutional and informational capability we have if he either allows a binding resolution on the peace process to pass, or if he allows sanctions against Israel on their settlements to pass, or if he does anything that recognizes Palestinian statehood, then we will have to respond, or if there's any public condemnation of Israel. And we would just urge the president to do the right thing and let Israel do what's right for Israel, and do not allow the anti-Semites at the UN to dictate the destiny of the world's only Jewish state. And I know that there's only under the Constitution certain things that the Congress can do. What I promise is that we will do everything necessary to respond if the president makes a bad move in here. And a move that I would suggest would be in bad faith for him completely in the administration. And it would certainly be a real tragedy if he would take this lame duck opportunity to take one last swipe at the most important ally that America has in this entire world. And I know many of you feel the same. And with that, I would return this mic back to Doug Lamborn, and he can call on any others. And let me say here, Doug and I both recognize that Ann Bayevsky, what she has said has been profound, and I endorse every syllable that she has spoken this morning and has articulated better than any of us could. Thank you.
Yes, I thank Ann also for being here and for her revealing and insightful remarks. We have several other congressmen who are here. We have French Hill, we have Lee Zeldin, and we have Garrett Graves, and I would like to invite these gentlemen to come up, if they're able to, and weigh in on this topic as well. Ron DeSantis of the state of Florida was with us earlier and had a conflict and had to leave, but he supports what we're seeing here today as well. Lee Zeldin of New York.
Well, thank you, Congressman Lamborn and Congressman Franks and Ann as well for your words. I would like to start off just by attributing my personal beliefs and comments. Really just express how everything that has been stated before me it's just 100% true and important for the duty of the United States at the United Nations and observations of what is our nation's greatest ally in Israel. And some around the world believe that Israel has a unilateral duty to get rolled. And we often, in talking about what does a viable two-state solution look like, there's a lot of attention and pressure placed on Israel, and they talk about Israel recognizing the Palestinians' right to exist. But there's a whole other part of this discussion that often gets missed. In order for there to truly be long-term peace and therefore to truly be a viable two-state solution, that means that the Palestinians would have to recognize Israel's right to exist. And those negotiating an agreement at the table have to have the ability, not only in good faith, to be reaching an agreement on behalf of their people, but truly have the power to be able to negotiate an agreement on behalf of their own people. And whether it's Hamas in Gaza or other elements that will not rest until Israel's wiped off the map, the fact that if the Palestinian Authority were to reach an agreement at that table, we still have too many of those elements that will not rest until Israel was eliminated. So for that alone, I believe that a lot of the international discourse and the discourse at the United Nations needs to put a lot more focus and attention on that reality that when there are innocent citizens being murdered, it's Palestinian terrorists murdering innocent Israelis. And also, as we're at this moment of transition between President Obama and President-elect Trump, during this period of transition, it is important for the United States to continue to stand strong with no daylight whatsoever between our administrations or between our people, which will be reflected in our conduct and our consistency at the United Nations over the course of these next couple of months. In closing, one observation that I had last August of 2015 in a visit to Israel, I would say, though, during that trip we went to Ramallah. It's worth noting that the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, who we met with, said that is non-negotiable. They will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Just to add a little more context as to what we're up against on the other side. But during that trip and a visit to Deck's Restaurant in Tiberias, right on the Sea of Galilee, during a completely filled evening, everyone was enjoying their dinners. The owner of the restaurant got on the microphone and interrupted everyone's dinner to preach her love for the United States. And a boat pulls in off the Sea of Galilee and starts blowing off these fireworks. And while the fireworks start going off, the owner starts playing God Bless America over the loudspeaker. And all of these Israelis who were there all stood up, taking a break from their own dinner, and they started to sing God Bless America. If they didn't know the words, they were lip syncing, they were trying hard. And it was a reminder in August of 2015, during all of the tension that had existed at that point, that despite all that tension, despite us being tested, the strength of the bond between the United States and Israelis remained strong then, it is strong today, and it will be strong come January. Thank you again for hosting this press conference, to Doug and Trent, and for your comments.
Lee, thank you. I'd like to also offer an opportunity to French Hill or Garrett Graves if they wish to weigh in as well. French Hill of the great state of Arkansas.
Thank you very much for hosting this event, and thank you for setting the stage for us on the seriousness of this matter. I want to add my words of support not only for the resolution that the House has passed and put in the strongest possible language, but also state how important it is in this transition that Lee Zeldin noted that there is no change in policy, and that we call on President Obama to exercise not only his veto while he's President of the United States, that we send a supportive message to the incoming Trump administration that this is an important issue in our global relationships. Just because for 35 years this has been a hard issue doesn't mean it stays in the too hard pile. It requires the United States to exercise significant leadership to make sure that we believe the only way we can have a two-state solution is through direct negotiations between the Palestinians and Israel. You know, I noted earlier this week that President Carter, whose most significant achievement in his 4 years in the White House was no doubt the historic arrangement between Israel and Egypt, and that relationship that led to the future of what we think of as this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the fact that he called on the UN to be an arbiter here and to support this effort at the Security Council is staggering to me. The idea that the Council is the place to take on this issue, it's not. And no one should know that better than former President Carter. So I was shocked by that. And I want to suggest to the President that he rethink that position and understand the importance that it is only through direct negotiation that we can ever successfully bring this conflict to a close. And Doug, I want to thank you for your leadership and for your words, and obviously for all the people on a bipartisan basis in the House of Representatives that stand with Israel on this very, very important matter. And thanks for including me today.
We also have Garrett Graves of the great state of Louisiana.
Just last night, we had the opportunity to debate House Concurrent Resolution 165, talking about the importance of a bilateral solution in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians. We also passed two other bills having to do with cybersecurity relationships with Israel. Right now, Israel, as was mentioned, is one of our strongest allies in the world, and certainly the strongest in the Middle East. Truly an island there, having democracy, respect for women, defense cooperation, many areas of technology, energy, and other areas where we cooperate. It's a vital ally. To look around to look around the world and see some of the absolute atrocities happening in regard to human rights in Cuba, in China, and many African nations, in Venezuela and elsewhere. And to see the United Nations come and apparently target Israel in this case is preposterous. It's absolutely disgusting to see this degree of politics come into an international body and attempt to victimize a nation like Israel. The reality is as was overwhelmingly communicated last night by the United States Congress, by the 435 members of Congress that intimately represent the over 320 million Americans. We need a bilateral solution. We need to continue on this path. And if the Obama administration does anything but keeping us on a path to a bilateral solution, it would be a travesty. And so I certainly call on the White House, call on President Obama to make it clear to the UN ambassador that we are to keep the United States on track, as was communicated loud and clear last night from the House of Representatives, representing again the 320 million Americans, that we must have a bilateral solution and continue on that track. Thank you.
In conclusion, I want to thank each of the members who spoke. You heard from Trent Franks, Garrett Graves, Lee Zeldin, and French Hill. And I want to thank most of all Ann Bajewski for your very important work that you do monitoring the UN and bringing to our attention where they unfortunately have fallen so far short. This concludes our remarks.
Can we ask questions?
Yeah, I'll be available to ask any questions.
Okay. I'm Penny Starr with CNS News. I wondered if you have spoken with Nikki Haley at all and how you might go forward.
No, I haven't had that chance. I'd love to. I really think there's going to be a huge difference between her and her predecessor.
Okay, thank you.
And knowing where Donald Trump is at based on his remarks on the campaign trail, I'm sure that that's a conversation they have already had. And so I'm reassured just by that alone. But any chance I get coming up, I will absolutely be pressing that issue on Nikki Haley.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
What would be your wish list to see the changes in the Trump administration to bring to the UN to change that tone, where every resolution doesn't go against Israel, and what could he do?
Well,
Certainly seems to have.
he needs to maintain the current policy of not fostering an idea on the part of the Palestinians that they can do end runs around Israel, run off to the UN, where there is kind of, unfortunately, a built-in bias against Israel, to take advantage of that, but to work in a bilateral negotiating posture. And that's what has to be stressed. And so we need to get back to that. When it comes to settlements, I don't want to see condemnations by the Trump administration or the UN ambassador on, or vice president on Israel when they have to make progress just to enable their people to have a place to live. So that's an issue that I hope doesn't become a point of contention like it unfortunately was between President Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Is there a chance any of the other members of the Security Council would veto this if?
I don't know the answer to that. I would hope so. I would certainly hope so.
What do you think?
I think it depends on what the substance is, which we don't know.
Okay.
But it's the American leadership that is
Right.
the key, and it always has been. You know, the world's leading democracy,
I don't know,
bastion
maybe,
of liberty. It's really up to America to do the right thing.
maybe Theresa May would step up or something if.
We would hope so, but like Ann says, we need American leadership to set the pace.
I was talking about surviving the next 2 months.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
RFC.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.